I stood frozen at the entrance of the Bellevue Hotel's grand ballroom. Champagne flute clutched so tightly in my hand, I feared it might shatter. Across the elegantly decorated room, my husband of 12 years, Nathan, had his hand resting casually on the small of his assistant Vanessa's back as they laughed together near the three-tiered birthday cake. The cake I had spent weeks planning with the pastry chef, customized with his favorite bourbon-infused chocolate and decorated with subtle nods to his achievements. Today was Nathan's 40th birthday, a milestone celebration I had spent months organizing down to the finest detail, and yet somehow I felt like the uninvited guest at my own party. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Caldwell, 38 years old, former corporate attorney turned legal consultant after I stepped back from my career track to support Nathan's rapidly expanding tech company. The company that Vanessa had joined just 8 months ago. The company that had consumed more and more of Nathan's time while our marriage quietly withered. I watched as Vanessa leaned in close to whisper something in Nathan's ear, her scarlet dress catching the light as she moved. He laughed again, his eyes never leaving her face. The same eyes that used to light up when they saw me, now barely acknowledging my presence when he came home late night after night. "Eleanor, darling, the party is magnificent," Diane, Nathan's mother, materialized beside me, resplendent in designer couture and family heirlooms. "Though I see my son is being rather distracted by his staff tonight. Hardly appropriate, is it?" Her words were honey-coated daggers always finding their mark. I smiled tightly. "Nathan's always valued his team," I replied diplomatically, though the words tasted bitter. "Indeed. Speaking of value, Richard mentioned Nathan's seeking additional investors for some expansion. Second round this year, isn't it?" Her perfectly manicured eyebrow arched slightly. "I do hope the first round wasn't mismanaged." Before I could respond, Nathan's voice boomed through the room as he tapped a knife against his glass. "Everyone, thank you for coming to celebrate with me tonight." The crowd of about 60, colleagues, investors, friends, family, turned toward him. I moved forward automatically, expecting to be called to his side as his wife. Instead, he continued, "I want to especially thank my incredible assistant Vanessa, who's not only helped organize this amazing event, but has been instrumental in our company's recent successes." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Vanessa beamed, placing her hand on Nathan's arm with practiced familiarity. My stomach twisted painfully. I hadn't organized this party? Since when? My name was on every contract, every payment. I'd spent countless hours in meetings that Nathan had been too busy to attend. And of course, he added, almost as an afterthought, my wife Eleanor, who's always been so understanding of the demands of success. Understanding. Is that what we were calling it now? Understanding that he missed our anniversary dinner last month because of an emergency meeting that his Instagram-happy colleague had inadvertently revealed was actually drinks with investors and Vanessa. Understanding that he'd been coming home with Vanessa's distinctive perfume lingering on his collar. As polite applause sounded around me, something inside me finally snapped. 3 years of increasing distance, of lonely nights, of making excuses to friends and family, of questioning my own worth, all while a folder sat locked in my home office, safe, untouched since our wedding day. The prenuptial agreement that Nathan had insisted upon to protect his future empire from gold diggers. The agreement his hotshot attorney had drafted, and my own counsel had quietly modified with a specific infidelity clause buried in the legal language. The clause Nathan had been too impatient, too arrogant to read carefully before signing. I made my way across the room, accepting congratulations and deflecting concerned looks from the few friends who knew things weren't as picture-perfect as Nathan portrayed. My heels clicked with purpose against the marble floor as I approached my husband and his assistant. "Eleanor, Nathan said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. People are loving the party. Yes, apparently I have Vanessa to thank for that, I replied evenly. Though strangely, my name is on all the vendor contracts. Vanessa had the decency to flush slightly. I just helped with the final details. Nathan's hand moved to her shoulder. Vanessa's been invaluable lately. I don't know what I'd do without her. I can imagine, I said, maintaining eye contact with him. Speaking of valuable things, Nathan, I've been meaning to discuss some paperwork with you. Perhaps after your speech? Can't it wait? Today's about celebrating. Oh, it's absolutely relevant to today, I assured him, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. In fact, it might just be the perfect time to revisit certain agreements we made 12 years ago. Nathan's brow furrowed slightly before his public smile reasserted itself. Whatever you need, honey. But first, let me cut this incredible cake. As he moved toward the cake with Vanessa still orbiting him like a devoted satellite, I felt a strange, calm settle over me. The folder in my handbag, containing copies of our prenuptial agreement, bank statements, text messages, hotel receipts, and private investigator reports, suddenly felt less like a shameful secret and more like a shield. Tonight, Nathan would learn that I wasn't just the understanding wife he could push into the background of his carefully curated life. He would discover exactly what he had signed all those years ago, thinking he was protecting his assets from me, never imagining I was quietly inserting a clause that would now protect me from him. The crowd began to sing "Happy Birthday," their voices rising in cheerful harmony as Nathan prepared to make his wish and blow out the candles. Little did he know, I had a wish of my own, one that was finally about to come true. I stood tall as the birthday song concluded, watching Nathan bask in the attention. The applause faded, and guests returned to their conversations, circulating through the grand ballroom with champagne flutes and miniature desserts from the elaborately designed food stations. My journey with Nathan began 15 years ago at Stanford Law. I was a second-year student with a prestigious clerkship lined up. He was completing his MBA, already talking about the tech company he would build. We were ambitious equals then, staying up late debating corporate law cases while sharing cheap wine and expensive dreams. "You'll be my secret weapon," he used to say, the brilliant legal mind behind my business empire. We married 3 years. Later, after I'd established myself at Harrington and Blake, specializing in intellectual property law. Nathan had just secured his first round of funding from Meridian Technologies. The future stretched before us, promising and bright. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor! I turned to see Maggie Chen, my closest friend since law school, approaching with 2 fresh champagne flutes. Her familiar presence was instantly comforting in the sea of Nathan's associates. "You look like you could use this," she said, handing me a glass, "and possibly an alibi, considering the death glare you were just giving your husband." I accepted the champagne gratefully. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you for 15 years. Her eyes drifted toward Nathan and Vanessa, now surrounded by a group of investors. Though bringing his assistant as his +1 to his own birthday party isn't exactly subtle on his part either. I sipped my champagne, letting the bubbles numb my throat. She wasn't invited as his +1. She was supposed to be staff, coordinating with vendors. I paused. At least that's what the planning documents indicated when I reviewed them last week. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "And yet she's wearing Valentino and air-kissing board members like she's co-hosting." Nathan introduced her as having organized everything, I added, the words still stinging. I spent 6 months on this party. Vendor meetings during my lunch. Breaks. Design approvals between client calls. He couldn't even acknowledge that. Have you considered that might be the least of his offenses? Maggie asked carefully. I met her gaze. You mean, am I aware my husband is likely sleeping with his 28-year-old assistant? Yes, I'm aware. 2 months ago, I might have defended him, made excuses about professional boundaries and mentorship. But that was before the hotel charges, on our shared credit card statement. Before the missed dinner reservations and weekend emergency meetings. Before I'd hired Davis Montgomery, former FBI agent turned private investigator, who had provided me with an extensive file documenting Nathan's indiscretions. What are you going to do? Maggie asked, her voice lowered as a server passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I watched Nathan across the room, commanding attention, completely in his element. He'd always been charismatic, ambitious, driven. I'd admired those qualities once. Now I wondered if they were just the presentable face of something uglier: ruthlessness, narcissism, entitlement. I have options, I said carefully. Do you remember the prenup negotiations before our wedding? Maggie nodded. How could I forget? Nathan insisted on it after that tech billionaire's divorce made headlines. You were so upset. Not upset enough to call off the wedding, I acknowledged, but upset enough to insist on my own counsel reviewing it. What I hadn't told Maggie, what I hadn't told anyone, was how that review had turned into a complete renegotiation. How my attorney, Patricia Winters, had recognized the deeply unbalanced terms and quietly inserted several clauses to protect me. How Nathan, eager to focus on his upcoming product launch and believing the prenup was solely for his protection, had signed the revised document with barely a glance. There's a clause, I continued, regarding infidelity. If either party engages in extramarital affairs, the injured spouse receives 50% of all assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of how they're titled, plus a significant one-time payment. Maggie's eyes widened. And Nathan agreed. To this? He signed it, I replied. Whether he understood what he was signing is another question. Eleanor, that's... Maggie hesitated. That's quite a card to play. Are you sure? Before I could answer, Nathan's college roommate and Meridian's CFO, James, took the microphone. If I could have everyone's attention, it's time for the highlight of our evening. Nathan, you've pioneered revolutionary technology, led an incredible team, and somehow managed to stay humble through it all. The crowd laughed appreciatively. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. But tonight isn't about Meridian's success. It's about celebrating you. And no one knows you better than your wonderful wife, Eleanor. Eleanor, would you like to say a few words? My heart skipped a beat as all eyes turned toward me. This was not part of the plan. I had specifically told James I didn't want to give a speech, that Nathan should be the focus. Now I stood spotlighted, my personal drama suddenly thrust onto a public stage. Nathan looked as surprised as I felt, though he recovered quickly, gesturing for me to join him at the front of the room. Vanessa stepped back, but remained hovering close by. I made my way forward, mind racing. The folder in my handbag seemed to grow heavier with each step. This wasn't how I'd planned to confront him. Not in front of 60 guests, not as public theater. But perhaps there was a certain justice in it. Nathan had always prioritized appearances, had always cared deeply about how others perceived him. Thank you, James, I said, taking the microphone with a practiced smile. Years of legal negotiations had taught me how to appear composed even when my insides were churning. And thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate Nathan. I turned toward my husband, meeting his eyes directly for what felt like the first time in months. There was wariness there, uncertainty. Good. He should be uncertain. Nathan and I met 15 years ago, both of us with big dreams and ambitions. He told me then that he would build something extraordinary, and he has. Meridian Technologies has transformed its industry under his leadership. Approving murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nathan's expression relaxed slightly. But what many of you might not know is that behind every contract, Every major business decision, every milestone in Meridian's growth. There were late nights at our dining room table, Nathan outlining his vision, me reviewing the legal implications. Our marriage and Meridian grew together, intertwined. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. Marriage, like any partnership, is built on trust, respect, and honesty. It requires both parties to honor their commitments, the explicit ones, written into vows or contracts, and the implicit ones that form the foundation of any relationship. Nathan's smile had frozen. He knew me well enough to sense the shift in my tone, to recognize when I was building a case rather than delivering a toast. Tonight, as we celebrate Nathan's accomplishments and the beginning of his 5th decade, I'm reminded of another document we signed at the beginning of our journey together, a document that outlined our mutual commitments and protections. I met his eyes again, a document that I've recently had cause to review in detail. The room had grown quieter now, the atmosphere shifting from celebration to something more uncertain. Nathan stepped toward me, reaching for the microphone, but I held firm. To my husband on his birthday, I continued, raising my champagne glass. May this new chapter bring clarity, honesty, and a renewed appreciation for the fine print in all of life's contracts. The toast hung in the air, its double meaning clear, to only a few but creating an undercurrent of tension that was palpable. After a moment's hesitation, guests raised their glasses uncertainly. Nathan took my elbow as soon as I lowered the microphone, his grip tight, his smile fixed. "What was that about?" he hissed. "Just acknowledging our partnership," I replied evenly. "Isn't that what marriage is? A partnership with clearly defined terms?" Before he could respond, guests approached to congratulate him, forcing him to release me and turn back to his admirers. But the look he gave me over his shoulder made one thing clear. The battle lines had been drawn. The birthday celebration continued around us, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't simply reacting to Nathan's actions, I was taking my own. The party continued its choreographed perfection, despite the tension that now hummed between Nathan and me. Waitstaff circulated with fresh champagne and artfully plated desserts. String musicians transitioned to more upbeat selections, and guests mingled in clusters throughout the ballroom, oblivious to the fault line opening beneath the polished marble floor. I retreated to a quiet corner, needing space to steady myself. The confrontation I'd been planning for weeks was accelerating, pushed forward by that unexpected toast. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a text from Maggie. "Need backup? Just say the word." Before I could respond, Patricia Winters appeared at my side. My attorney's presence at the party had been Nathan's idea, ironically enough. "Always good to have our legal counsel mingling with investors," he'd said. If only he realized how significant her role had actually been. That was quite a toast, Patricia said quietly, her silver-streaked bob framing an expression of measured concern. "Not how we discussed approaching this." "James put me on the spot," I explained. It felt appropriate in the moment. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. At 62, she'd navigated decades of high-stakes negotiations and contentious divorces. "Little surprised her anymore. Nathan's watching you," she observed. "He looks unsettled." I followed her gaze across the room. Nathan stood with the board chairman and 2 investors, but his attention was clearly divided. His eyes kept finding me, his expression a mixture of confusion and calculation. "Good," I said. "He should be unsettled." Patricia's expression remained neutral. "Remember our strategy, Eleanor. Emotional satisfaction is fleeting. Financial security is enduring." "I remember," I assured her. "This isn't about revenge. It's about securing what I've earned." For 12 years, I had invested in Nathan's vision. I'd left my partnership track to provide legal guidance for Meridian Technologies as it grew. I'd managed our household, maintained our social connections, and strategically befriended the spouses of potential investors. I'd done everything expected of the supportive wife while still providing valuable professional expertise. The success Nathan celebrated tonight was built in part on my sacrifices. My labor, my intelligence. Eleanor, there you are. I turned to see Diane approaching, champagne glass in hand, Nathan's father, Richard, trailing behind her. My in-laws' marriage had served as an uncomfortable preview of what mine had become, a powerful man and the wife who had surrendered her own ambitions to facilitate his success. That was quite a peculiar toast, dear, Diane said, her smile fixed. Rather cryptic for a birthday celebration. Was it? I asked innocently. I was just acknowledging the foundations of our partnership. Richard cleared his throat. Nathan mentioned you've been distant lately. Working too much, he said. I nearly laughed at the irony. Did he? Interesting perspective. Marriage requires compromise, Diane offered, her voice dropping into the soothing, patronizing tone she'd used throughout my relationship with Nathan, especially when married to exceptional men with exceptional demands on their time and attention. Patricia, still beside me, straightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard enough about my mother-in-law over the years to recognize the patterns. Actually, she interjected smoothly, Eleanor has been remarkably accommodating. Few spouses would provide the level of professional support she has while receiving so little recognition. Diane's smile tightened. And you are? Patricia Winters. I've been Eleanor's attorney since before her marriage to Nathan. Her attorney? Richard's bushy eyebrows rose. I thought you were Meridian's counsel. I represent the company on certain matters, Patricia acknowledged. But my primary client has always been Eleanor. The implications of this statement hung in the air. Richard, a shrewd businessman himself, caught them immediately. His expression shifted from confusion to calculation, eyes narrowing slightly. I see, he said finally. Eleanor, perhaps we should have a private conversation about whatever seems to be troubling you. Family matters should stay within the family. This isn't merely a family matter, I replied calmly. It's a legal one as well. Before Richard could respond, Nathan appeared at his father's side. His smile remained in place, but tension radiated from him like heat. Everything okay over here? He asked, eyes moving between his parents and me. Wonderful party, son, Richard said, clapping Nathan on the shoulder. Though I think your wife might need a moment of your time. Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Eleanor, shall we step outside for a minute? It wasn't a question, not really. I recognized the tone, the one he used when steering difficult investors or challenging board members toward his preferred outcome, confident that his charm and authority would prevail. Actually, I countered, I think we should include Patricia in our conversation, since it concerns certain agreements she helped draft. Nathan's eyes flickered to Patricia, then back to me. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed quickly by disbelief. You can't be serious, he said, voice lowered. Whatever issue you've invented, we're not discussing it in the middle of my birthday celebration. I agree, I replied. The terrace would offer more privacy. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he nodded curtly, turning to his parents with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Excuse us for a few minutes. Eleanor has some business matters she's concerned about. We moved toward the French doors leading to the terrace, Patricia following at a discreet distance. The night air was cool against my skin after the warmth of the ballroom. City lights glittered below us, the view carefully selected for this very moment. The crowning achievement of Nathan's 40th celebration, overlooking the skyline of the city he was conquering. Whatever this is about, Nathan began once we were alone, it could have waited. Creating drama at my birthday party is beneath you, Eleanor. Is it drama to expect fidelity in marriage? I asked quietly. To expect recognition for my contributions? To expect basic respect? Nathan's expression hardened. If this is about Vanessa, this is about patterns, I interrupted. Patterns of behavior that I've tolerated for too long while you built your empire, partly on my expertise, partly on my reputation, and entirely with my support. I've never denied your contributions, he countered. Meridian's success benefits both of us. Does it? When was the last time you acknowledged my work publicly? When was the last time you consulted me on a major decision? When was the last time you considered my needs alongside your ambitions? He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, frustration evident. This isn't the time or place for a marital therapy session, Eleanor. No, I agreed. It's the time and place for legal clarity. I gestured to Patricia, who approached with professional composure, producing a slim folder from her designer tote bag. What is this? Nathan demanded. A copy of our prenuptial agreement, I replied. The one you insisted upon to protect your future assets from claims in the event of divorce. Nathan's expression shifted to one of impatient dismissal. I'm familiar with our prenup. It ensures clean separation of assets acquired before marriage and protects my company's equity. Those were indeed your primary concerns during drafting, Patricia confirmed. But as with any contract, the final executed version included several additional provisions to protect both parties' interests. I watched Nathan's face carefully as Patricia opened the folder and presented him with a highlighted section of the document. His confident expression faltered as he scanned the text, then read it again more carefully. This wasn't in the original draft, he said finally, voice tight. It was in the version you signed, Patricia replied matter-of-factly. Page 14, Section 8.3, the infidelity clause with specific financial penalties. This is ridiculous. Nathan's voice rose slightly before he caught himself, glancing toward the ballroom doors. This would never hold up in court. It has held up in similar cases, Patricia countered. We have your signature on the final document, initialed on each page, notarized and properly filed. More importantly, we have substantial evidence of your violations of the terms. Nathan's gaze snapped to me, anger and disbelief warring in his expression. You had me followed? Recorded? I protected my interests, I replied steadily, just as you've always protected yours. He laughed, a short, harsh sound. So this is your play? Threaten me with some clause I supposedly agreed to? What do you want, Eleanor? More money in your personal accounts? A bigger donation to your pro bono project? A public apology? I want what I'm entitled to under the agreement we both signed, I said simply. 50% of all marital assets, including your Meridian shares, plus the penalty payment outlined in Section 8.4. The color drained from Nathan's face as the full implications registered. Meridian Technologies was preparing for another funding round. Any significant change in his equity position would raise serious questions with investors, potentially derailing deals years in the making. You would destroy everything we've built? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Over what? Hurt feelings? Jealousy? I didn't destroy anything, Nathan. I'm simply enforcing the contract you created. I maintained eye contact, refusing to waver. And I'm not the one who violated its terms. Nathan's phone chimed with a text message. He glanced at it reflexively, then looked back toward the ballroom. Following his gaze, I saw Vanessa standing just inside the doors, watching us with poorly concealed concern. The moment crystallized everything. His distraction even now, his inability to fully engage with the crisis at hand because his attention remained divided, because Vanessa still commanded his focus despite everything at stake. Your guests are waiting for you, I said quietly. Your speech is scheduled for 9:30. You wouldn't want to disappoint them. Nathan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the accommodating wife he'd taken for granted, but as the formidable attorney I'd been before I stepped back to support his dreams. The woman who had quietly ensured her own protection when he thought only of securing his. This conversation isn't over, he said finally. No, I agreed. It's only just beginning. Nathan returned to the ballroom with his public persona firmly back in place, though I noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the barely perceptible tightness around his smile. I followed several steps behind, Patricia at my side. "He'll try to find a way out," she murmured. "Men like Nathan always believe they can negotiate, manipulate, or charm their way through any situation." "Let him try," I replied, taking a fresh glass of champagne from a passing server. "The documentation is comprehensive." As if on cue, James approached the microphone again, tapping it gently to capture everyone's attention. "And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, a few words from the man of the hour." Applause filled the room as Nathan took his place at the center of attention. He launched into his speech with practiced ease, thanking investors, acknowledging key team members, and sharing carefully curated anecdotes about Meridian's journey from startup to industry leader. I watched him perform, marveling at how easily he commanded the room. This had always been Nathan's gift, making people believe in his vision, convincing them that his success would become their success if they simply followed his lead. I had fallen under that spell myself once. "None of this would have been possible," Nathan continued, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on me, "without the support of those closest to me. My parents, who taught me to aim high. My core team, who've been with me through every challenge." He paused and something shifted in his expression. "And my wife, Eleanor, whose legal expertise and unwavering commitment have been foundation stones of Meridian's success." Surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nathan had rarely acknowledged my professional contributions so explicitly. I maintained a neutral expression, even as I recognized his strategy, suddenly highlighting my involvement in the company to establish my role as an insider, rather than an aggrieved spouse. "Eleanor has been not just my wife, but my closest advisor," Nathan continued, his voice warm with convincing sincerity. "Her counsel has shaped Meridian from its inception." As the speech concluded and applause erupted once more, Maggie appeared at my side. "That was quite the about-face," she whispered. "What happened on that terrace?" Reality intruded on Nathan's carefully constructed narrative, I replied quietly. "He's recalibrating." "And what exactly does recalibration look like for Nathan?" "Caldwell?" "First, he'll try to charm me," I predicted, watching as Nathan accepted congratulations from a group of investors. "When that fails, he'll attempt to intimidate me. When that fails too, he'll try to negotiate." Across the room, I saw Vanessa's confusion as she processed Nathan's unexpected acknowledgement of my role. She'd been noticeably absent from his thanks, despite his earlier praise of her contributions. The subtle shift in power dynamics wasn't lost on her, or on Richard and Diane, who were watching their son with shrewd attention. "Eleanor." Michael Grayson, Meridian's lead counsel, approached, with a carefully neutral expression. "Wonderful event. Nathan mentioned you might have some concerns about company matters that perhaps we should discuss." "And so it begins," I thought. "Actually, Michael," Patricia interjected smoothly, "the matters in question fall under family law, rather than corporate governance, though there will certainly be implications for Meridian's ownership structure." Michael's facade of casual inquiry faltered. "I'm not sure I follow." "You will," Patricia assured him. "I'll be in touch with your office Monday morning." As Michael retreated, looking unsettled, Nathan appeared at my side, his hand coming to rest at the small of my back in a gesture that would appear affectionate to observers, but that I recognized as possessive. "We should circulate," he said, his voice low. "The Stevens Group is considering increasing their investment. Their managing partner specifically asked to speak with both of us." I allowed him to guide me through the crowd, maintaining the illusion of unity while acutely aware of the space between us. A distance measured not in inches, but in betrayals, in secrets, in fundamental breaches of trust. For the next hour, we performed the roles of successful power couple with practiced precision. Nathan introduced me as the legal mind behind Meridian's early contracts and my most trusted advisor, acknowledgments that would have meant everything to me a year ago but now rang hollow. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Nathan's composure showed its first cracks. When James mentioned Vanessa's extraordinary work on an upcoming project, Nathan cut him off mid-sentence with uncharacteristic abruptness. When his father attempted to pull him aside for a private conversation, Nathan deflected with a terseness that left Richard visibly surprised. "The car will be ready in 20 minutes," Nathan informed me as the last cluster of guests collected their belongings. "We should say our goodbyes." "Actually," I replied, "I've arranged for my own transportation." His expression hardened. "Don't you think we should present a united front until we've had a chance to discuss this situation privately?" "I think we've presented enough false fronts for one evening," I countered quietly. "I'm staying at the Alexis tonight. Patricia has all the relevant documentation. Your attorneys can contact her on Monday." "Eleanor," Nathan's voice dropped, his tone shifting from commanding to conciliatory. "Let's not rush into anything irrevocable. Whatever you think happened with Vanessa is thoroughly documented," I finished for him. "Along with the Andrews Hotel charges, the business dinners that never appeared on your public calendar, and the weekend in Sonoma that you claimed was a tech conference." Nathan's expression flickered between shock and calculation. "You've been planning this for months." "I've been aware of your infidelity for months," I corrected. "The planning began when I could no longer deny the evidence." He glanced around, ensuring we weren't overheard. "This isn't just about us, Eleanor. You're threatening the company, investors, jobs, everything we've built." "No," I said firmly. "I'm enforcing the terms of an agreement you proposed and signed. If those terms now seem inconvenient, perhaps you should have read them more carefully." A flash of genuine anger crossed his face. "This can't be what you want. To publicly humiliate me? To damage Meridian? To walk away from 12 years of marriage over what? A few indiscretions?" The casual dismissal of his betrayal struck like a physical blow. This was the heart of it. Nathan truly believed. His behavior was a minor transgression, a small price I should willingly pay for the privilege of being Mrs. Caldwell. "What I want," I said carefully, "is recognition of my contributions and compensation for my losses, both professional and personal. The prenuptial agreement provides a framework for that resolution." Nathan studied me, calculation replacing anger. "And if I were to offer a different framework, one that acknowledges your contributions more generously?" "You're welcome to have your attorneys present alternatives," I replied evenly. "Patricia will review them." Before he could respond, Vanessa approached, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes darted nervously between us. "Nathan, the Thompson Group is leaving. You said you wanted to speak with them before they go." The interruption crystallized the moment perfectly. Even now, with his marriage and company ownership hanging in the balance, Nathan's attention was pulled away by Vanessa's summons. "I'll be right there," he told her, his tone sharper than usual. She retreated, visibly confused by the tension. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Don't keep them waiting on my account." Nathan hesitated, clearly torn between damage control with major investors and damage control in his personal life. As always, business won out. "This isn't finished," he said. The word somewhere between a promise and a threat. "No," I agreed. "But it has changed irrevocably." I watched him walk away, shoulders squared, already shifting back into CEO mode as he approached the departing investors. The ease of his transition was its own kind of revelation, further confirmation that our marriage had become just another asset to be managed, another performance to maintain, another contract whose terms he believed he could renegotiate when they no longer suited him. Maggie appeared at my side, car keys already in hand. "Ready to go?" I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of confrontation began to fade. Alexis has my overnight bag. Checked and confirmed. Rooms under my name as discussed. We collected my wrap from the coat check, moving through the now emptying ballroom. At the entrance, I paused for one final look back. The elegant decorations, the half-empty champagne glasses, the birthday cake with several slices removed, all evidence of a celebration that had transformed into something else entirely. Party I'd spent months planning had become the stage for a fundamental shift in my life's trajectory. I'd arrived as Nathan's supportive wife and would leave as his soon-to-be adversary in what would likely become a high-profile legal battle. Yet despite the uncertainty ahead, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of pretense had lifted. The exhausting work of ignoring evidence, making excuses, and diminishing my own worth to accommodate Nathan's betrayals, all of it set aside at last. Eleanor. Diane's voice stopped me at the door. She approached alone, her expression unreadable. Whatever disagreement you and Nathan are having, I trust you'll handle it with appropriate discretion. The familiar implication was clear. Appearances mattered above all. The Caldwell family image must be protected, regardless of personal cost. Appropriate transparency might serve everyone better, I countered quietly. Discretion has protected the wrong behaviors for too long. Something flickered. In her eyes, not anger as I expected, but something more complex. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the weight of her own compromises, the bargains she'd made with herself throughout decades of marriage to Richard. "Be careful, Eleanor," she said finally. "When you challenge men like Nathan and Richard, they don't simply concede. They fight." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "The difference is, I came prepared for battle. Nathan didn't even realize we were at war until tonight." The Alexis Hotel's penthouse suite offered a sanctuary of quiet elegance after the emotional turbulence of the evening. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, lights twinkling against the night sky like distant witnesses to the seismic shift in my life. I slipped off my heels, padding across the plush carpet to pour myself a glass of water from the crystal decanter by the bed. "You should eat something," Maggie said, already on the phone with room service. "Celebration dinner, or crisis management fuel. Either way, you need food." I smiled faintly at her practicality. Maggie had always been this way, addressing emotional earthquakes with immediate practical concerns. When we'd pulled all-nighters in law school, she'd been the one ensuring we had protein bars and electrolyte drinks. When her own divorce had upended her life 3 years ago, she'd handled it with the same methodical approach: legal strategy first, emotional processing later. "I ordered that wild mushroom risotto you like, and chocolate soufflé," she announced, ending the call. "Now, what's the immediate action plan?" I sank into the armchair by the window, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion. "Patricia is filing the initial paperwork Monday morning. We expect Nathan's team to respond with either denial or a settlement offer by midweek. And what are the odds he tries to invalidate the prenup entirely?" "High," I acknowledged, "but we've prepared for that. The infidelity clause was properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. More importantly, we have substantial evidence of his violations." Maggie nodded, settling onto the sofa across from me. "And emotionally? How are you really doing with all this?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been operating in strategic mode for so long, gathering evidence, consulting with Patricia, planning each step of tonight's confrontation, that I'd pushed aside the deeper emotional reckoning. "I don't know," I admitted finally. Relieved that it's out in the open. Angry that it came to this. Sad about what we've lost. Occasionally, incredibly satisfied at the look on his face when he realized what was happening. Maggie laughed. "That last one is perfectly healthy, just so you know." "Is it?" I sighed, watching the city lights blur slightly as I let my eyes unfocus. There was a moment tonight when I almost faltered, when he acknowledged my contributions during his speech. For a second, I remembered how it felt when he used to look at me and really see me. That's the Nathan you fell in love with, Maggie observed. The one who recognized your value and made you feel like an equal partner. Yes, I agreed quietly. But that Nathan hasn't existed for years. Tonight was strategy, not sincerity. Phone buzzed on the side table, a text from Nathan. We need to talk, without lawyers. This can still be resolved privately. I showed the message to Maggie, who rolled her eyes. Right on schedule. What did you predict? Charm, then intimidation, then negotiation? He's moving faster than I expected, I observed. This is already phase 3. A gentle knock announced room service. As Maggie signed for the delivery, I moved to the elegant dining table where the server arranged our late dinner. The familiar comfort of the risotto, creamy, fragrant, perfectly seasoned, provided an unexpected emotional anchor. This simple pleasure existed independently of the upheaval in my life. Other pleasures would continue to exist, I reminded myself after the storm passed. You should respond, Maggie advised, nodding toward my phone. Set the terms of engagement from the beginning. I considered my reply carefully before typing. All communication should go through our respective counsel. Patricia will be available Monday morning. Nathan's response came immediately. This approach hurts both of us. The prenup terms you're threatening to enforce would devastate Meridian's upcoming funding round. Is that what you want? To destroy everything we built? He's still trying to make this about the company, not about his betrayal, I observed, showing Maggie the message. Classic deflection, she agreed. Make you responsible for protecting his business interests even as he violated your personal ones. I typed my response. I'm enforcing terms you proposed and agreed to. If those terms now threaten your business interests, that's unfortunate, but not my responsibility to fix. 3 typing dots appeared immediately, disappeared, then reappeared. Nathan was clearly composing and reconsidering his response. Finally, at least meet with me tomorrow. Brunch at Elliott's, 11 a.m., just us. He wants to charm you in person, Maggie warned, where he can read your expressions, use your history against you. She was right. Nathan had always excelled at in-person persuasion, reading micro-expressions, adjusting his approach in real time, leveraging shared memories and experiences to create emotional resonance. It was what made him such an effective CEO and fundraiser. I know, I said, but refusing to meet would make me appear afraid or uncertain. I sent my reply, Elliott's. 11:30, 1 hour only. This doesn't change the legal process beginning Monday. Nathan's response was immediate. Thank you. See you then. I set the phone aside, returning to my dinner with mixed emotions. The confrontation at the party had been necessary but controlled, occurring on my terms, with Patricia present, after weeks of preparation. Tomorrow's meeting would be different. Just Nathan and me, without the buffer of guests or the structure of a public event. You should prepare for every tactic, Maggie advised, reading my thoughts as she often did. He'll remind you of good times. He'll minimize his behavior with Vanessa. He'll appeal to your history together. And he'll make promises he has no intention of keeping, I added. Promises about transparency, about changing, about recommitting to our marriage. Would you consider reconciliation? Maggie asked carefully. If he seemed genuinely remorseful, I considered the question, poking at a mushroom with my fork. 6 months ago, maybe. Before I had confirmation of the affairs. Before I saw how easily he lies. Before I realized how completely he's taken me for granted. And now? Now I know? Too much to go back, I said simply. It's not just Vanessa. It's the pattern. It's the fundamental lack of respect. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. I expected another message from Nathan, but instead found a note from Patricia with the subject line, Urgent, review before meeting Nathan. I opened it to find a detailed PowerPoint presentation. The first slide simply read, Potential Caldwell Negotiation Tactics and Recommended Responses. Patricia knows him well, I remarked, showing Maggie the email. She's dealt with enough high-powered executives to recognize the playbook, Maggie agreed. Smart to prepare you this thoroughly. We spent the next hour reviewing Patricia's materials, anticipating arguments Nathan might make, practicing firm but measured responses, identifying emotional triggers I should guard against. The preparation felt familiar, reminiscent of my days preparing for high-stakes negotiations or difficult cross-examinations. You're not going in as his wife tomorrow, Maggie observed. You're going in as opposing counsel. The distinction resonated. For too long, I'd approached our relationship conflicts as a wife seeking understanding. Tomorrow, I would approach our meeting as an attorney protecting my client's interests, and I was both attorney and client. Around 1 a.m., exhaustion finally overtook strategy. Maggie retired to the suite's second bedroom while I completed my evening routine on autopilot, removing makeup, changing into silk pajamas, setting out clothes for morning. The mundane tasks felt oddly comforting in their normalcy. As I settled into bed, my phone lit up with a final text from Nathan. I'm sorry things reached this point. Looking forward to finding a better path forward tomorrow. I still believe in us. The message was perfectly calibrated to slip past my defenses, humble without accepting specific blame, forward-looking rather than dwelling on past actions, appealing to our shared history and potential future. Classic Nathan. I left it unanswered, placing the phone face down on the nightstand. Instead of engaging with his carefully crafted message, I opened the hotel room's desk drawer and removed a small, leather-bound journal I'd packed in my overnight bag. Its pages contained notes I'd made over the past months, not legal strategy or evidence documentation, but personal reflections on what I wanted for my future, independent of Nathan and Meridian. The first entry, dated 3 months ago, began, simply, what would my life look like if I prioritized my own fulfillment above maintaining appearances? I read through the journal slowly, reconnecting with the clarity I'd found in these private moments of honesty. The final entry, written just yesterday, concluded, The hardest part isn't leaving Nathan. It's leaving behind the person I became. For Nathan, the accommodating, diminished version of myself that I created to fit into his vision. I closed the journal, placing it on the nightstand beside my silenced phone. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I needed rest. Not just physical, but emotional. I needed to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Nathan Caldwell and who I could become after. As I drifted toward sleep, the city lights creating patterns on the ceiling above me, I allowed myself to acknowledge the complexity of grief that had been building beneath my strategic planning. Grief not just for my marriage, but for the years I'd compromised, for the career I'd sidelined, for the versions of myself I'd suppressed to maintain Nathan's comfort and convenience. Tomorrow's confrontation would be difficult, but tonight's recognition felt like its own kind of freedom, the first step toward reclaiming not just my financial due, but my full self. Sleep eluded me despite my exhaustion. I woke at dawn, the pale light filtering through the hotel's sheer curtains as the city began to stir below. Rather than fighting to reclaim unconsciousness, I slipped from bed and changed into the workout clothes I'd packed, heading to the hotel's fitness center. Physical exertion had always cleared my mind, and today I needed perfect clarity. An hour of vigorous exercise left me physically tired but mentally alert. After a quick shower, I found Maggie already awake, working on her laptop at the suite's dining table, a pot of coffee steaming beside her. I've been reviewing the financial disclosures Nathan submitted during your last tax filing, she said, not looking up from her screen. There are some interesting discrepancies between what he reported to the IRS and what he presented to investors. Tax optimization is standard for executives, I replied, pouring myself coffee. Patricia already flagged the potential issues. This goes beyond optimization, Eleanor. Maggie turned her laptop to show me spreadsheets highlighting several transactions. These look like deliberate attempts to obscure certain assets. If I were still at the DA's office, I'd be asking questions. I studied the numbers, my legal training immediately recognizing the pattern. Nathan had always been aggressive with financial strategies, pushing boundaries while maintaining plausible deniability. It was part of what made him successful, and potentially vulnerable. Send these to Patricia, I decided, but we don't leverage them unless absolutely necessary. This isn't about destroying Nathan. It's about securing what I'm owed. Maggie nodded, though I caught her slight frown. She'd been more deeply hurt by her own ex-husband's betrayal and sometimes struggled to understand my measured approach. For her, justice had required a certain public reckoning. For me, the goal was independence, not vengeance. By 11, I was dressed for battle in a charcoal Armani suit I'd worn to my most challenging negotiations, fitted enough to be feminine but structured enough to command respect. My hair was smoothed into a sleek chignon, makeup minimal but precise. Nothing about my appearance would give Nathan emotional leverage. No hint of vulnerability, no reminder of our more intimate moments. Remember, Maggie said as I prepared, to leave. When Nathan realizes charm isn't working, he'll switch to intimidation. When intimidation fails, he'll try to bargain. Your advantage is that you've anticipated his playbook. And my disadvantage? She smiled ruefully. You loved him once. Maybe part of you still does. The observation landed like a stone in still. Water, ripples of truth disturbing my carefully maintained composure. I didn't respond, simply squeezed her hand before departing. Elliot's was Nathan's choice, one of Seattle's premier restaurants where he was known and respected, where staff greeted him by name and led me to Mr. Caldwell's usual table overlooking the waterfront. A power play disguised as courtesy, reminding me of his status and influence even as we negotiated its dissolution. Nathan was already seated when I arrived, rising as I approached. He'd chosen a charcoal suit nearly identical in tone to mine, one of the many synchronicities that had once seemed meaningful, now merely coincidental. He looked immaculate as always, though I noted the slight shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jawline. Eleanor. He moved to embrace me, but I extended my hand instead, transforming the gesture into a businesslike handshake, his momentary surprise quickly masked by a rueful smile. Thank you for coming. You have 55 minutes, I replied, checking my watch as I took my seat. I have another appointment at 1, a lie, but a necessary one. Never give Nathan an open-ended meeting. He excelled at wearing down opposition through sheer persistence. I've taken the liberty of ordering for us, he said, gesturing to the waiter who immediately appeared with mimosas and a selection of appetizers. Your favorites. Another calculated move, invoking our shared history, demonstrating his attention to my preferences. I left the mimosa untouched, needing complete clarity. Nathan, let's not pretend this is a social occasion. You wanted to meet. What do you want to discuss? He sighed, leaning back slightly. Direct as always. It's one of the things I've always admired about you. I remained silent, waiting. Flattery was his typical opening gambit. I want to apologize, he continued after a moment. My behavior with Vanessa was inappropriate. I lost sight of what matters. Most. Our partnership, our history, everything we've built together. Your behavior with Vanessa and others, I corrected calmly. Let's be accurate. A flicker of irritation crossed his face before smooth composure returned. Yes, there were indiscretions, mistakes I deeply regret and won't repeat. Your regret is noted but irrelevant to our current situation. The prenuptial agreement doesn't include a forgiveness clause. Nathan leaned forward, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he reserved for his most persuasive moments. Eleanor, we're talking about 12 years of marriage. Are you really willing to throw that away over mistakes that meant nothing? Vanessa, The others, they were distractions, nothing more. Distractions you actively pursued while lying to my face, I replied evenly. Distractions you prioritized over our marriage vows. Distractions that violated the terms of a legal agreement you proposed and signed. He reached for my hand across the table. I withdrew it smoothly, placing both hands in my lap. We can rebuild, he insisted. Better than before. I've already terminated Vanessa's employment. I'm willing to commit to complete transparency, shared calendars, open device access, whatever you need to rebuild trust. The offer surprised me, briefly. Vanessa had been valuable to Meridian. Her termination represented an actual sacrifice on Nathan's part. But then I recognized the strategy, a visible concession to demonstrate sincerity, while avoiding the real issues at stake. This isn't about surveillance or control, Nathan. It's about consequences for choices already made. His expression hardened, slightly. And your choices? Secretly gathering evidence against your husband? Hiring private investigators? Planning this ambush for months while pretending everything was normal? Where's your accountability? Phase 2. Right on schedule. Intimidation. Through accusation. Attempting to establish moral equivalence between his affairs and my response to them. I didn't violate our vows or our contract, I replied calmly. I protected my interests when it became clear you wouldn't. By threatening everything we've built? His voice rose slightly before he controlled it, conscious of nearby diners. The timing of this couldn't be worse. The Stevens Group is finalizing terms for the next funding round. If there's any indication of instability in my position or ownership structure, they'll walk. And there it was, the true purpose of this meeting. Not our marriage, but Meridian's imminent deal. That sounds like a business problem, not a marital one, I observed. Though I imagine the investors would be equally concerned about a CEO who commits contractual violations without reading the terms. Nathan's expression darkened. Don't do this, Eleanor. You stand to lose as much as I do if Meridian suffers. Actually, under the terms of the prenuptial agreement, my compensation is established regardless of Meridian's current valuation. Your company's future prospects don't affect my settlement. He studied me for a long moment, calculation replacing anger. Nathan had always been adaptable, quick to recalibrate when one strategy failed. I watched the transition happen in real time, his posture shifting from confrontational to collaborative. What if we could find a solution that serves both our interests? He asked, voice modulating to the reasonable tone he used in board meetings. A renegotiated agreement that provides you with fair compensation while preserving the stability Meridian needs right now? Phase 3. Bargaining. Right on schedule. I'm listening, I said neutrally. Instead of enforcing the prenup terms, we create a new agreement. Nathan's words came faster now, energy returning as he outlined his vision. You receive 20% of my Meridian shares, transferred immediately, a board seat if you want. Full acknowledgement of your contributions to the company's success. A public narrative that frames this as a collaborative decision to separate your professional interests from our personal relationship. The offer was substantial, more generous than most divorce settlements. In financial terms alone, it represented millions, but it was still significantly less than I was entitled to under the prenuptial agreement. And in exchange, I asked, though I already knew, you don't enforce the infidelity clause. We file for a no-fault divorce citing irreconcilable differences. Everything proceeds quietly, with minimal disruption to Meridian's operations or market position. I took a sip of water, considering him carefully. Why would I accept less than I'm legally entitled to? Because you don't actually want to destroy what we built, Nathan replied with the confidence of someone who believed he understood me completely. The Eleanor I know takes pride in Meridian's success. She wouldn't sabotage it out of spite. The Eleanor you knew, I corrected quietly. was a partner who expected reciprocal loyalty and respect. That Eleanor no longer exists. Nathan's confidence faltered momentarily. "She's still there," he insisted. "The brilliant strategist who sees the bigger picture. Who knows that a messy legal battle serves neither of us?" Our main courses arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. I hadn't specified dietary preferences, yet the kitchen had prepared the grilled salmon with asparagus I typically ordered. Another reminder of Nathan's attention to detail when it served his interests. "Here's my counteroffer," I said once the server departed. "I'll accept 40% of your Meridian shares. A board seat with real voting power, not an advisory position. Public acknowledgement of my role in founding and developing Meridian's legal framework, and a formal amendment to the company history that includes my contributions." Nathan's fork paused midway to his mouth. 40% would make you the largest individual shareholder after me. Yes, it would. The board would never approve such a significant ownership shift without explanation. "Then you'll need to provide one," I replied. "Though I imagine my wife is entitled to 50% plus penalties under our prenup's infidelity clause, might be more awkward than we've agreed to restructure our professional relationship." Nathan set down his fork, food forgotten. 30%, the board seat, the public acknowledgement, and we present this as a mutual decision reached amicably. I checked my watch. "You have 15 minutes remaining. I'll need any proposal in writing, reviewed by Patricia before I consider it final." Frustration flickered across his face. "This isn't a deposition, Eleanor. We're trying to have a real conversation about our future." "No," I corrected. "We're negotiating the terms of our separation after you repeatedly violated our marriage contract. The time for real conversations about our future ended when you chose to pursue relationships outside our marriage." "One mistake shouldn't erase 12 years, he argued, leaning forward intently. "It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern of choices, Nathan. Choices that revealed your priorities and values more clearly than your words ever could." He stared at me for a long moment as if seeing something new. "You've changed." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I have." The acknowledgement hung between us, reshaping the emotional landscape of our interaction. For perhaps the first time, Nathan was recognizing that his carefully constructed reality, one where I would ultimately forgive, accommodate, and adjust to his needs, had crumbled. "I'll have the proposal drafted today," he said finally. 35% ownership, the board seat, the public acknowledgement, and we keep this civil for both our sakes. I considered the offer, mentally calculating its value against the full enforcement of the prenup terms. The financial difference was substantial, but not insurmountable. The reputational and operational benefits to Meridian, and by extension to my own shares, might ultimately balance the equation. "I'll review it with counsel," I said, rising from my seat. "Have your attorney send it to Patricia by end of day." Nathan stood as well, his expression a complex mixture of resignation and calculation. Always calculation. "This could have ended differently, you know, if you'd come to me directly when you first had concerns." "No," I replied with certainty. "It couldn't have. Because you would have denied, deflected, and charmed your way out of accountability, just as you attempted to do today." I extended my hand, keeping the interaction formal. After a moment's hesitation, he took it, the familiar warmth of his palm against mine triggering a cascade of memories I firmly suppressed. "Goodbye, Nathan." As I walked away, I felt his eyes following me, the gaze of a man unused to losing control of any situation, especially one involving me. For 12 years, I had been the constant in his equation, the reliable variable he could predict and manipulate. Today, that equation had fundamentally changed. Outside the restaurant, I paused on the waterfront promenade, the fresh breeze from the sound clearing my head. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "How did it go?" I typed my reply. "Exactly." As expected, he's sending a settlement offer today. 35% of his Meridian shares plus a board seat. Her response came immediately. Taking it? I considered the question, watching the ferries cross the Sound against the backdrop of distant mountains. The path forward wasn't simply about financial calculations or legal entitlements. It was about reclaiming agency, about establishing the true value of my contributions, both to Meridian and to the marriage Nathan had devalued. Still deciding, I replied. But for the first time in years, it's entirely my choice. The following days unfolded with the methodical precision of a complex legal proceeding. Nathan's attorneys delivered the proposed settlement agreement to Patricia by 5 p.m. as promised. 35% of his Meridian shares, a voting board position, and public acknowledgement of my contributions. The document was comprehensive, clearly prepared in advance rather than hastily drafted after our meeting. Nathan had anticipated this outcome, having a contingency plan already prepared, another reminder of his strategic nature. Patricia, Maggie, and I reviewed the proposal, over dinner in my hotel suite, dissecting each clause with professional detachment despite the personal stakes. The transfer of shares is structured to minimize tax implications, Patricia observed, highlighting sections of the document. That benefits both of you. But this non-disparagement clause is expansive. It essentially prevents you from ever discussing the real reasons for your divorce. Standard for high-profile separations, Maggie commented, though the penalties for violation are unusually severe. I studied the paragraph in question. If I ever publicly revealed Nathan's infidelity as the cause of our divorce, I would forfeit a significant portion of the settlement. The clause effectively bought my silence regarding his personal conduct. He's protecting his image, I noted. Reputation management is crucial for his continued leadership at Meridian. The question is whether your silence is worth the price he's offering, Patricia said carefully. The prenup would give you more financially, though with considerably more disruption to Meridian and potentially to your own future involvement with the company. I weighed the options, considering not just the financial calculations, but the personal cost of a protracted public legal battle. The settlement offered a cleaner break, though at a discount to what I was legally entitled to receive. There's also this interesting clause, Maggie pointed out, turning to page 17. He's offering accelerated vesting of your options from the executive compensation package you received when you provided legal services during Meridian's Series B funding. I had almost forgotten about those options, part of my compensation for the extensive work I'd done reviewing and restructuring Meridian's intellectual property portfolio before its second funding round. The options had significant value, but weren't set to vest for another 2 years. That's actually quite valuable, Patricia acknowledged, especially considering Meridian's projected growth after this upcoming funding round. My phone chimed with an incoming email, the daily business update from my legal consulting practice. While the divorce had consumed my recent focus, my professional work continued. 3 new clients had requested consultations for the following week, and a major technology firm was inquiring about my availability for a comprehensive IP audit. The reminder of my independent professional identity shifted something in my perspective. This negotiation with Nathan wasn't just about our marriage, or even about his betrayal. It was about properly valuing my contributions, both past and future. I want to propose a modification, I decided. Accept the 35% ownership, stake and board position, but with 2 amendments. First, my board seat includes a guaranteed position on the compensation committee. Second, I want formal recognition as Meridian's founding legal counsel, not just an acknowledgement of contributions. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. The compensation committee gives you oversight of executive pay packages, including Nathan's. And the founding counsel recognition establishes my role in Meridian's creation story, not just as Nathan's wife who helped out, I added. He won't like either of those terms, Maggie predicted. Especially the compensation committee position. That's direct oversight of his financial arrangements. Precisely, I agreed. It's not punitive, but it establishes appropriate checks and balances going forward. Patricia made notes on the document. I'll draft the counter-proposal tonight. How quickly do you want to move on this? I considered the timing strategically. Nathan expects me to deliberate longer, to demonstrate independence by making him wait. But there's value in responding quickly, showing I'm making decisions from a position of clarity rather than emotion. Tomorrow morning, then, Patricia. Decided. I'll have it on his attorney's desk by 9 a.m. Later that evening, after Patricia and Maggie had departed, I stood at the hotel window watching the city lights, feeling a strange sense of calm despite the life-altering decisions being made. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Hoping you're considering our discussion today. This approach gives us both what we need without unnecessary damage. His message reaffirmed my decision. Even now, he was framing our negotiation in terms of mutual benefit, glossing over the fundamental breach of trust that had brought us to this point. The settlement wasn't about giving us both what we need. It was about establishing consequences for his actions while securing my rightful position. I left the message unanswered. The following morning brought unexpected developments. Patricia called shortly after 8, her typically measured tone edged with surprise. Nathan's attorney just contacted me. They've accepted your counter-proposal with one modification. Nathan wants quarterly one-on-one meetings with you regarding company strategy separate from board functions. The request was unexpected, revealing a dimension of Nathan's thinking I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just protecting his financial and reputational interests. He was trying to maintain a connection, to ensure our paths would continue to intersect regularly. That's not acceptable, I replied immediately. All interactions should be within formal board structures, documented and transparent. I thought you might say that, Patricia acknowledged. I'll convey your position. Nathan's attorney responded within the hour. They would drop the one-on-one meeting requirement if I would agree to serve on the strategic planning committee alongside Nathan, which would meet monthly with other senior executives present. The counteroffer was more reasonable, professional rather than personal, structured rather than private. Yet it still reflected Nathan's desire to maintain some form of regular contact. It's a legitimate request from a business perspective, Patricia observed when we discussed it. As major shareholders with board positions, some level of collaboration is expected. And it gives him regular access to you in a context where he excels. Corporate strategy, Maggie added with characteristic directness. Don't underestimate his ability to use those meetings to his advantage. I considered their perspectives, weighing pragmatism against personal boundaries. I'll agree to the strategic planning committee with 2 conditions. All meetings are minuted by a third party, and I can designate a proxy to attend in my place when necessary. Patricia nodded approvingly. That maintains appropriate professional distance while acknowledging the practical realities of your ongoing business relationship. By midday, we had agreement in principle on all major terms. Nathan's attorneys would draft the final documents for review within 48 hours, with signing scheduled for the following Monday, a timeline that would allow Meridian to announce the ownership restructuring before the Stevens Group finalized their investment decision. That evening, I received another text from Nathan. Thank you for your thoughtful approach to these negotiations. I believe we've found a solution that respects both our interests. Would you consider meeting for dinner this weekend before the formal signing? There are some personal matters I'd like to discuss separate from the legal arrangements. The invitation was predictable. Nathan attempting to reestablish a personal connection, perhaps hoping that a private conversation might soften my position on some detail of the settlement. More likely, he was struggling to accept the new reality where I was, no longer accessibly reliably his. My response was brief and clear. The settlement addresses all relevant matters between us. I'll see you Monday at the signing with our respective counsel. After sending the message, I opened my laptop and reviewed job listings at several prestigious law firms. While my consulting practice was successful, I'd been considering a return to full-time legal work, perhaps specializing in intellectual property protection for emerging technologies, building on my experience with Meridian. The settlement would give me financial security and flexibility, but my professional identity had always been grounded in legal practice. An invitation had arrived that morning from Alexandra Bennett, managing partner at Bennett, Wong & Mitchell, one of Seattle's most respected technology-focused firms. "I've followed your career with interest," she wrote. "Your work on Meridian's IP portfolio was particularly impressive. If you're considering new opportunities, I'd welcome a conversation." I drafted a response accepting her invitation for coffee the following week, after the settlement signing. The timing felt significant, a new professional chapter beginning as my marriage officially transformed into a business arrangement. My phone rang. Diane Caldwell, Nathan's mother. I hesitated before answering, uncertain what agenda might be. Behind her call, "Eleanor, I hope I'm not disturbing you," she began, her voice carrying its usual polished control. "Richard and I have been informed of the general terms of your agreement with Nathan." "I see," I replied neutrally. "Those terms were meant to be confidential until executed." "Yes, well, Nathan felt we should be prepared for the public announcement." A brief pause. "I wanted you to know that while we regret the circumstances, we respect how you've handled this situation." The comment surprised me. Diane had always prioritized family image over authenticity, appearance over substance. Her acknowledgement seemed uncharacteristically direct. "Thank you," I said simply, unsure what else to add. "Nathan made significant mistakes," she continued, each word sounding carefully chosen. "His father and I failed to instill certain values that might have prevented them. That failure has cost our family in ways that extend beyond financial settlements." The admission left me momentarily speechless. In 12 years, I had never heard Diane acknowledge any shortcoming in Nathan or in their parenting. "I appreciate your candor," I finally responded. "Though I wasn't expecting this conversation." "Nor was I expecting to have it," she admitted with a small laugh that carried surprising warmth. "But seeing how you've navigated this situation with dignity and resolve, it's prompted some reflection." After we ended the call, I sat with the unexpected interaction, trying to place it within the larger pattern of the Caldwell family dynamics. Was Diane's call a genuine moment of recognition, or another strategic move in a family that approached personal relationships with the same calculation they brought to business dealings? Perhaps it didn't matter. Whether sincere or strategic, her acknowledgement represented a shift in how I was perceived. No longer just Nathan's accommodating wife, but a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had set boundaries and stuck to them. Mondays. Signing would formalize that transformation, converting our marriage into a business relationship with clearly defined terms. Nathan would remain Meridian's CEO, but now with a powerful independent shareholder monitoring his decisions. I would have formal recognition for my contributions and a platform from which to build my next professional chapter. The path forward was taking shape, not as an ending, but as a recalibration. Not as defeat, but as long overdue recognition. Not as loss, but as reclamation. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a turning point. I chose my outfit deliberately, a tailored navy suit I'd purchased the previous week, rather than anything from the wardrobe I'd shared with Nathan. This day wouldn't be defined by what was ending, but by what was beginning. The settlement signing was scheduled for 10 at the offices of Winters & Associates, Patricia's firm. Neutral territory, neither Nathan's corporate headquarters nor the law firm that had drafted our prenuptial agreement 12 years earlier. I arrived 30 minutes early, reviewing the final documents with Patricia in her corner office overlooking the Seattle skyline. "Everything is in order," she confirmed, sliding the bound agreement across her desk. 35% ownership, transfer, board position with compensation committee seat, formal recognition as founding legal counsel, and the accelerated vesting of your options. And the non-disparagement clause? Limited to business matters only, Patricia replied with satisfaction. You cannot criticize Meridian or its leadership publicly, but there are no restrictions on discussing personal matters or the reasons for your divorce. Nathan's team conceded that point yesterday afternoon. This was an unexpected victory. Nathan's reputation had always been paramount to him. The careful curation of his public persona as brilliant innovator, visionary leader, perfect husband. That he would allow me the freedom to speak about his infidelity suggested either remarkable growth or significant pressure. He needs this deal concluded before the Stevens Group finalizes their investment, Patricia added, answering my unspoken question. They've scheduled final diligence reviews for Wednesday. His attorneys couldn't risk any delays over that clause. At precisely 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a message from Patricia's assistant. Nathan and his legal team had arrived. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the encounter. This wouldn't be like our brunch meeting, where personal history and emotion had simmered beneath the surface. Today was purely business, the formal dissolution of one relationship and the establishment of another. Nathan entered Patricia's conference room with Michael Grayson and 2 other attorneys from Meridian's legal team. He wore a dark gray suit with a blue tie that matched my outfit. Another of those coincidences that might once have seemed meaningful. His expression was composed, professional, though I noted the tension around his eyes, the slight tightness in his smile. Eleanor, he greeted me with a nod. Patricia. Let's begin, Patricia suggested, gesturing toward the arranged seating. The signing process was methodical, almost ceremonial. Each page reviewed, each signature witnessed and notarized. The rhythmic turning of pages and scratch of pens created a strange cadence, the soundtrack to the dismantling of 12 years of marriage and its reconstruction into a business arrangement. As I signed the final page, transferring my interest in our shared home to Nathan in exchange for additional stock options, I felt a surprising lightness. The house had never truly felt like mine. Designed largely to Nathan's specifications, decorated for entertaining his colleagues and investors rather than for our comfort. Releasing it felt less like sacrifice and more like shedding an ill-fitting garment. That concludes the settlement execution, Patricia announced, gathering the documents for processing. Copies will be distributed to all parties by end of business today. The ownership transfer will be reflected in Meridian's records immediately, Michael added. The board will be notified this afternoon, with a press release scheduled for tomorrow morning regarding the new corporate structure. Nathan cleared his throat. The press release has been drafted to explain that Eleanor is taking a more active role in Meridian's governance after years of behind-the-scenes contributions. It positions this as a natural evolution of our professional relationship. I'd like to review that release before it goes out, I replied. Of course, he agreed quickly. I'll have communications send it over within the hour. As the attorneys gathered their materials and exchanged final comments, Nathan moved closer to me, speaking quietly. Would you have a moment to talk privately before you leave? I hesitated, noting Patricia's concerned glance from across the room. Briefly, I conceded. Patricia's office is available. Once we were alone in the office, Nathan's carefully maintained composure softened slightly. He looked tired, I realized, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes not just from sleepless nights but from sustained tension. I wanted to thank you, he said, surprising me, for handling this with such dignity. As opposed to? A rueful smile crossed his face, creating a public scandal that would have destroyed everything we built. You had that power, Eleanor. The evidence, the legal leverage. You could have dismantled Meridian out of justified anger. That was never my intention, I replied honestly. This wasn't about punishment. It was about appropriate consequences and recognition. He nodded slowly. I understand that now, though I wish I'd understood it sooner. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I haven't handled our separation well, or the years before it, if I'm being honest. The admission hung in the air between us, perhaps the most genuine acknowledgement of fault he'd offered since I discovered his infidelity. Not excuses about stress or success pressure, not deflection about my own emotional distance, but a simple recognition of his failure. No, I agreed quietly. You didn't. I convinced myself that certain indulgences were justified by my position, by what I'd achieved. He looked out the window rather than at me, his profile sharp against the cityscape beyond. That the normal rules didn't apply because I was building something extraordinary. The normal rules always apply, Nathan, especially to those with power. He turned back to me, something vulnerable briefly visible in his expression. I realize now what I've lost, not just my wife, but my most trusted advisor, the person who saw me clearly and still chose to stand beside me. The words might have moved me once, might have been the beginning of reconciliation in the marriage we'd had years ago. Now they simply confirmed the rightness of my decision. Nathan was mourning the loss of my support, my loyalty, my willingness to accommodate his needs and ambitions. He was recognizing my value only after it had been withdrawn. We still have a professional relationship to maintain, I reminded him, steering the conversation back to practical matters. I take my board responsibilities seriously and expect transparency in all Meridian operations moving forward. He straightened, professional composure returning. Of course. The first board meeting with you as a director is scheduled for Friday. Committee assignments will be formalized then. And the Stevens Group investment? On track for finalization by end of week, assuming the ownership transition is smoothly communicated. I nodded, satisfied with the information. Then I'll review the press release when it arrives and see you at Friday's board meeting. For a moment, he seemed about to say something more personal, but instead extended his hand formally. To new beginnings, Eleanor. I accepted the handshake, maintaining the professional distance we'd established. To appropriate endings and new beginnings. After Nathan and his legal team departed, Patricia returned to her office, studying me with quiet assessment. How are you feeling? Relieved, I admitted, and ready to move forward. She smiled, the expression warming her typically reserved features. You've handled this impeccably, Eleanor. Not many clients maintain such clarity of purpose through these proceedings. I had excellent counsel, I acknowledged, and a prenuptial agreement with remarkably thorough infidelity clauses. Patricia's smile widened. One of my more satisfying drafting achievements, though I never expected it to be tested quite so dramatically. We shared a moment of professional appreciation, attorney and client recognizing the elegant legal solution that had transformed a potential crisis into a controlled transition. What comes next for you? Patricia asked as we gathered our belongings. Will you stay in Seattle? The question had been circling in my mind throughout the settlement process. Seattle had been home for 12 years, but it was also deeply entwined with my identity as Nathan's wife. Every restaurant, park, and neighborhood carried memories of our shared life. For now, I replied. I have the board position at Meridian and my consulting practice, but I'm considering other opportunities as well. Bennett, Wong, and Mitchell? Patricia asked perceptively. Alexandra must have mentioned our upcoming meeting. Possibly. I'm meeting with Alexandra next week to discuss their IP practice. Patricia nodded approvingly. They'd be fortunate to have you. Though if you're considering a return to full-time practice, my offer to join Winters & Associates remains open. We could use your expertise in technology transactions. The offer was tempting. Patricia had built a reputation for representing women executives and professionals in complex legal matters, creating a firm culture that valued precision and integrity over billable hours and political maneuvering. "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. "Let me explore all options before making any decisions." As I left Patricia's office building, I checked my phone to find an email from James, Meridian's CFO and Nathan's longtime friend. The subject line was simply, "Thank you." The message was brief but startling in its candor. "Eleanor, I want to express my personal gratitude for how you've handled this transition. The arrangement you negotiated benefits Meridian while holding Nathan accountable in ways that were long overdue. Your presence on the board will strengthen our governance substantially. If you're amenable, I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss the upcoming audit committee review before Friday's meeting." The message represented a significant shift. James had always been friendly but firmly in Nathan's camp, his loyalty dating back to their college days. That he would reach out independently, acknowledging the value of the changes I'd initiated, suggested the internal dynamics at Meridian were more complex than I'd realized. Perhaps Nathan's behavior had concerned others within the company leadership. Perhaps my new position was welcomed, not just tolerated. Perhaps the narrative Nathan had constructed, of universal admiration and support for his leadership style, had cracks visible to those who worked closely with him. I replied to James, agreeing to meet Thursday afternoon to discuss the audit committee matters, then continued to my car. The sky was clearing after morning rain, sunlight breaking through clouds in distinct beams that illuminated parts of the city while leaving others in shadow. The visual metaphor wasn't lost on me, clarity emerging gradually, revelation coming in stages rather than all at once. My phone rang as I reached my car, Maggie checking in after the signing. "It's done," I told her, a simple statement that encompassed the complexity of the morning's events. "How do you feel?" she asked, echoing Patricia's earlier question. I considered the answer carefully, taking inventory of my emotional state. "Centered," I said finally, "like I've reclaimed something essential that I didn't realize I'd surrendered." "That's because you have," Maggie replied with characteristic directness. "Now the question is what you'll build with it." As I drove away from Patricia's office, that question expanded in my mind, filling the space once occupied by doubts and accommodations and careful calculations of Nathan's moods and preferences. What would I build now that I was constructing entirely for myself? The possibilities stretched before me, undefined but full of potential, a future limited only by my own choices rather than by the constraints of being Mrs. Nathan Caldwell. The days following the settlement unfolded with unexpected momentum. Meridian's press release announcing my new role as a major shareholder and board member generated significant industry attention. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from former colleagues, interview requests from technology publications, and invitations to speak at conferences about corporate governance and women in technology leadership. The narrative Nathan's PR team had crafted, positioning my elevated role as a natural evolution rather than the result of marital dissolution, created a surprisingly empowering public story. I was suddenly visible in ways I hadn't been during 12 years of supporting Nathan's vision from the background. "You've become a person of interest overnight," Maggie observed as we sorted through the messages in my temporary office at her law firm. I'd accepted her offer of workspace while I transitioned my consulting practice and considered next steps. TechCrunch wants an exclusive on your journey from behind-the-scenes legal counsel to major stakeholder and board member. They never cared about my legal contributions before, I noted with a mixture of amusement and irritation. 12 years of IP strategy and contract architecture didn't merit a mention, but acquiring 35% of Meridian's shares makes me fascinating. "Welcome to the attention economy," Maggie replied dryly. "Achievement matters less than perception of power." I selected several of the more substantive inquiries to respond to, focusing on opportunities that would establish My professional identity separate from both Nathan and Meridian. A panel discussion on intellectual property protection for emerging technologies. A guest lecture at the law school where I'd once been a promising student with a clear career trajectory. A profile in a legal journal focusing on attorneys who had transitioned between corporate and private practice. Thursday afternoon brought my scheduled meeting with James at Meridian's headquarters, my first return to the building since Nathan's birthday party. I chose a different entrance than the one I'd typically used when visiting as Nathan's wife, deliberately establishing new patterns for this new relationship. The receptionist's momentary confusion at my arrival revealed the awkward reality of my transformed status. No longer Nathan Caldwell's wife, but not yet a familiar board member with established routines. "Ms. Caldwell for James Morton," I said, deliberately using my first married name rather than reverting to my maiden name. The Caldwell identity I'd spent 12 years building belonged to me now, redefined on my own terms. James met me in the executive conference room rather than his office, another subtle acknowledgement of my changed status. No longer a visitor requiring escort, but a governance authority with rightful access to the company's core spaces. "Eleanor," he greeted me warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for making time before tomorrow's board meeting." "Of course," I replied, accepting the handshake. "Your email suggested there are audit committee matters we should discuss privately." James nodded, his expression turning serious as he closed the conference room door. "I wanted to brief you on some concerns before they're presented formally. As a major shareholder and incoming audit committee member, you should have the full context." He spread several financial reports on the table, pointing to highlighted sections. For the past 18 months, Nathan has been allocating significant resources to a subsidiary called Meridian Advanced Technologies. The entity was created for exploratory R&D with minimal board oversight. I studied the documents, quickly identifying the pattern. The subsidiary's expenses have increased 340% since formation, but there's no corresponding product development timeline or revenue projection. "Exactly," James confirmed. "As CFO, I've requested detailed accounting repeatedly. The responses have been inadequate." "Who oversees this subsidiary?" James hesitated briefly. "Officially, it reports directly to Nathan. Day-to-day operations are managed by Robert Chen from engineering and—" He paused. "Vanessa leads." The revelation landed with surprising weight. Vanessa's role extended beyond executive assistant to operational leadership of a secretive subsidiary, with significant funding. "I see," I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the personal implications. "And the audit committee hasn't investigated these allocations?" The committee chair has been reluctant to challenge Nathan directly. But with the upcoming Stevens Group investment and your new position, there's an opportunity to demand greater transparency. The situation clarified in my mind. Not just financial irregularities, but a governance failure that had allowed Nathan to operate with insufficient oversight. The board had become too deferential to its charismatic CEO, a pattern I'd witnessed developing over years, but had been unable to address as merely the founder's wife. "I'll need complete records of all transactions related to this subsidiary before tomorrow's meeting," I said decisively. "And I'd like to speak with Robert Chen about the technical aspects of whatever they're developing." James nodded, visibly relieved. "I've prepared a comprehensive file. As for Chen, he's been increasingly uncomfortable with the lack of documentation. I believe he'll speak candidly with you." As we continued reviewing the financial materials, a more complete picture emerged. Beyond the mysterious subsidiary, there were other governance concerns: executive compensation packages approved without proper benchmarking, related party transactions with minimal disclosure, strategic initiatives launched with insufficient risk assessment. "The board has essentially rubber-stamped Nathan's decisions for years," James admitted. "Most members were selected for their network connections or investment relationships rather than governance expertise." "That changes now," I replied firmly. starting with full disclosure of all activities within Meridian Advanced Technologies. After the meeting with James, I had 2 hours before my next appointment. Coffee with Alexandra Bennett to discuss potential opportunities at her firm. Rather than leaving Meridian's offices, I decided to visit Robert Chen directly, leveraging my new authority to begin addressing the governance issues immediately. I found him in the engineering department, surrounded by whiteboards covered with diagrams and equations. He looked up with surprise when his assistant announced my arrival. "Ms. Caldwell," he greeted me, clearly uncertain about protocol. "I wasn't expecting... That is, we didn't have a scheduled..." "I apologize for the interruption, Robert," I said, keeping my tone friendly but direct. "I've been reviewing the financial allocations to Meridian Advanced Technologies and hoped you might provide some technical context for tomorrow's board meeting." His expression shifted from confusion to what appeared to be relief. "Of course. Would you prefer to speak privately?" We moved to a small conference room adjacent to the engineering floor. Once the door closed, Robert's professional reserve cracked, slightly. "I've been trying to establish proper documentation protocols for months," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The project has enormous potential, but the lack of oversight is concerning." "What exactly is the project?" I asked. Robert hesitated, weighing his response. "Officially, we're developing enhanced security protocols for financial technology applications. The reality is more complex." He pulled out his tablet, opening a secure folder with extensive technical specifications. "We've created an AI-driven predictive model for market behaviors. Not just standard algorithmic trading, but a system that identifies regulatory gaps and potential exploitation vectors." I reviewed the materials with growing concern. "This looks like it's designed to identify legal gray areas in financial regulations." "That's one application," Robert acknowledged, uncomfortably. "The technology itself is neutral. It could help regulatory bodies strengthen oversight or help financial entities operate in technically legal but ethically questionable ways." "And which direction has Nathan been steering the development?" Robert's silence was answer enough. "Who has access to this technology currently?" I asked. "Development is compartmentalized. Only 5 engineers, including myself, understand the full architecture. Nathan has demonstrated early versions to select potential partners, but those meetings aren't documented in our standard systems." The implications were troubling, not just financial irregularities, but potentially serious ethical and legal concerns, depending on how the technology was being positioned to these undocumented partners. "I'll need a complete technical brief and list of all external entities who have seen demonstrations," I said. "And I want development paused until the board has reviewed the ethical implications and potential regulatory issues." Robert nodded, visible relief crossing his features. "I'll have everything prepared by morning, and thank you. This project needs proper governance." As I left Meridian's offices, my mind worked through the implications of what I'd discovered. Nathan had been operating a potentially controversial technology development with minimal oversight, significant funding, and the involvement of Vanessa in a leadership role. The connections were too substantial to be coincidental. Whatever had been happening at Meridian Advanced Technologies, it represented exactly the kind of governance failure that my new board position was perfectly situated to address. Tomorrow's board meeting would be more consequential than anyone, including Nathan, had anticipated. I arrived at my coffee meeting with Alexandra Bennett, still processing these revelations. The elegant attorney greeted me warmly at the upscale cafe she'd selected, her keen eyes noting my distracted expression. "You seem preoccupied, Eleanor. Second thoughts about exploring new opportunities?" "Not at all," I assured her, refocusing on our meeting. "Just preparing for my first Meridian board meeting tomorrow. It appears there will be more substantive governance matters to address than expected." Alexandra smiled knowingly. Companies, long dominated by charismatic founders, often have surprising gaps in their governance structures. Your perspective as both insider and newly independent director will be invaluable. Our conversation flowed easily, covering her firm's technology, practice, my experience with IP protection for emerging technologies, and potential client relationships I might bring. Alexandra was offering a senior partner position, a significant acknowledgement of my expertise and reputation despite my years away from full-time practice. We would structure your role to accommodate your Meridian board responsibilities, she explained. In fact, that governance experience enhances your value to our clients who are navigating similar transitions from founder-led startups to mature corporations. The opportunity was compelling. A return to sophisticated legal practice, with the flexibility to maintain my new role at Meridian. Throughout our discussion, however, my thoughts kept returning to the revelations about Meridian Advanced Technologies and what they suggested about Nathan's activities during our marriage. Had the secretive subsidiary been connected to his relationship with Vanessa? Was it merely coincidence that she held a leadership role in his most closely guarded initiative? The timing aligned too neatly with the beginning of their affair to be entirely unrelated. As Alexandra outlined the compensation package her firm was offering, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. We need to talk about Meridian Advanced Technologies. I have information you should know before tomorrow's board meeting. Vanessa leads. The message was so unexpected I nearly dropped my phone. Vanessa reaching out directly, bypassing Nathan, mentioning the very subsidiary I'd just been investigating. This represented a significant development. Is everything all right? Alexandra asked, noting my reaction. Yes, I replied, composing myself quickly. Just an unexpected message related to tomorrow's board meeting. I returned the phone to my purse, focusing on our conversation. Your offer is extremely generous, Alexandra. I'd like some time to consider it in the context of my other commitments. Of course, she agreed smoothly. Take the weekend to think it through. We're in no rush, and I want you to be confident in your decision. As we concluded our meeting, I found myself standing at another crossroads. Not just professionally between consulting, firm practice, and corporate governance, but personally in how I would respond to Vanessa's unexpected outreach. The woman, who had been involved with my husband, who now apparently held a leadership role in his most secretive initiative, was offering information before my first board meeting. The strategic implications were significant, as were the personal ones. Whatever Vanessa wanted to share could potentially impact Meridian's governance, the Stevens Group investment, and my newly established role within the company. The question was whether I could separate the professional value of her information from the personal history between us, and whether I should even try to make that separation. Walking to my car, I composed a careful response. What specifically about Meridian Advanced Technologies do you believe I should know? Her reply came almost immediately. Not over text. Can we meet tonight? It concerns potential regulatory violations and tomorrow's board presentation. The reference to regulatory violations elevated the situation from corporate politics to potential legal exposure. As a board member and major shareholder, I had fiduciary responsibilities that couldn't be ignored, regardless of the messenger. Legal counsel should be present for any such discussion, I replied. I can meet with you and Patricia Winters at her office at 7 p.m. The 3 typing dots appeared and disappeared several times before Vanessa's response arrived. Agreed. I'll be there. Patricia's office remained illuminated well past business hours, the lights of neighboring buildings creating a constellation of glowing windows against the darkening sky. I arrived early, briefing Patricia on the day's revelations about Meridian Advanced Technologies and Vanessa's unexpected message. This could be a trap, Patricia cautioned, arranging 3 chairs in her office to create a neutral meeting space. Vanessa may be acting as Nathan's proxy, testing your commitment to your board role or trying to manipulate you before tomorrow's meeting. Or she may have legitimate concerns about regulatory violations, I countered. Either way, we need to hear what she has to say. Patricia nodded, her expression thoughtful. Remember that anything she discloses about potential legal violations creates obligations for you as a board member. Once informed, you cannot simply ignore problematic activities. I understand. That's why I wanted you present, both for legal protection and to establish a record of proper governance response. At precisely 7, Patricia's assistant escorted Vanessa into the office. Her confidence seemed diminished outside of Meridian's environment, her usual poise replaced by visible tension. No longer in the sleek dresses she favored at company events. She wore a simple blazer over jeans, professional but without the calculated elegance I associated with her. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, glancing between Patricia and me as she took the offered seat. "I realize this is unconventional given our circumstances." "Let's focus on the matter at hand," I replied neutrally. "You mentioned potential regulatory violations related to Meridian Advanced Technologies." Vanessa nodded, placing a thumb drive on Patricia's desk. "This contains internal documentation about the predictive market behavior system MAT has been developing. Robert Chen likely gave you the official overview." "He did," I confirmed, not revealing what specific information I'd already gathered. "What Robert doesn't know is how Nathan has been using the technology," Vanessa continued. "For the past 6 months, he's been providing early access to select hedge funds and private equity firms, not as potential clients, but as active users of development versions." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Are you suggesting Meridian is allowing external entities to use unfinished technology for actual market activities?" "Yes, but it's more specific than that," Vanessa replied, her professional demeanor strengthening, as she focused on the technical details. "The system identifies temporary regulatory gaps, situations where market rules haven't caught up to technological capabilities. Nathan has been providing access to these insights in exchange for what he calls development funding channeled through offshore entities." I maintained a neutral expression despite my internal alarm. If accurate, this represented not just ethical concerns, but potentially securities violations and anti-competitive behavior. "What's your role in this arrangement?" I asked directly. Vanessa hesitated, the question clearly touching on personal territory she'd hoped to avoid. "I manage the relationships with these external partners and document the system's performance. Initially, I believed we were conducting legitimate beta testing, with appropriate controls." "And when did you realize otherwise?" Patricia prompted. 3 weeks ago, when I saw communications regarding the offshore payment structure." Vanessa's composure faltered slightly. "The arrangements were deliberately designed to obscure the nature of the transactions. When I questioned Nathan about regulatory compliance, he said the board had approved a stealth development model and that I should focus on my assigned responsibilities." "The board has approved no such model," I stated flatly. "These activities have never been presented for governance review." Vanessa nodded, seeming unsurprised. "I suspected as much. That's when I began documenting everything and considering my options." The timing aligned too perfectly with Nathan's birthday party and our confrontation, exactly when Vanessa would have realized her position might be compromised by our divorce. "Why come to me?" I asked, the unspoken personal history hanging between us. "You could have taken this to any board member or directly to regulatory authorities." Vanessa met my gaze directly for the first time. "Because you understand Nathan better than anyone. You know he believes rules are flexible for those smart enough to navigate around them, and because—" She paused. "I owe you this, at minimum." The acknowledgement of her debt, not just professional but personal, settled in the room like a physical presence. "Is Nathan aware you're here?" Patricia asked pragmatically. "No. He believes I'm meeting with the development team to prepare tomorrow's board presentation." Vanessa hesitated before adding, "My continued involvement isn't motivated by our personal relationship." That ended weeks ago when I recognized the ethical implications of what's happening at MAT. I absorbed this information without visible reaction, though inwardly I noted the timing once again aligned with my confrontation at Nathan's birthday party. Whether Vanessa's ethical awakening was genuine or merely self-protective recalibration remained unclear. "What specifically do you believe will happen at tomorrow's board meeting?" I asked. "Nathan plans to present MAT as a revolutionary compliance tool ready for market, omitting its current deployment to select partners and the regulatory concerns. He'll seek board approval for accelerated investment and expanded development, essentially legitimizing activities already underway." Patricia and I exchanged glances, the strategy becoming clear. If the board approved further development without full disclosure of existing activities, Nathan would create a governance shield for potentially problematic actions. "The thumb drive contains everything," Vanessa continued. "Partnership agreements, communication records, technical documentation, and transaction histories for the offshore entities. I've also included my personal observations of meetings with external partners." Patricia retrieved an evidence envelope from her desk drawer, placing the thumb drive inside and sealing it with both our signatures as witnesses. "This will remain secure until we've verified its contents and determined appropriate next steps." "What are you hoping will happen, Vanessa?" I asked, studying her carefully. "What's your desired outcome from sharing this information?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She considered it for several moments before responding. "I want Meridian to succeed ethically," she said finally. "The technology is revolutionary, but its application needs proper guardrails. And personally," she paused, "I want to correct my own mistakes, professional and otherwise." Whether her motivations were self-preservation, genuine remorse, or strategic positioning in a changing power dynamic, the information she provided required serious consideration. "We'll need time to review these materials before tomorrow's meeting," I said. "In the meantime, I suggest you proceed as normally as possible. If Nathan suspects you've shared this information, it could complicate an already delicate situation." Vanessa nodded, rising to leave. At the door, she paused. "I know this doesn't change anything between us, Eleanor. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it." After she departed, Patricia and I immediately began reviewing the contents of the thumb drive, working well into the night to verify the documents and assess their implications. The evidence was more comprehensive than I'd expected, detailed, methodically organized, and deeply troubling. "This isn't just aggressive business strategy," Patricia observed around midnight, reviewing partnership agreements with hedge funds. "These arrangements deliberately circumvent securities regulations by exploiting technical loopholes. The SEC would take a very dim view. And the board has been kept entirely in the dark," I added, examining the financial flows through offshore entities. "Nathan has been operating MAT as essentially a private venture using Meridian resources. By 3 a.m., we had developed a clear understanding of the situation and a strategy for the board meeting." Patricia arranged for digital forensic experts to verify the documentation's authenticity while I prepared a comprehensive governance response. After a brief rest at my hotel, I arrived at Meridian's headquarters for the 9 a.m. board meeting looking composed and well-prepared despite my sleepless night. The boardroom gradually filled with directors, primarily venture capital representatives and technology executives who had supported Nathan throughout Meridian's growth. James arrived last, giving me a subtle nod as he took his seat. Nathan entered, precisely on time, projecting his usual confident authority as he called the meeting to order. After perfunctory agenda items, he turned to the main business. "Before we discuss quarterly results, I'd like to introduce an exciting development from our Advanced Technologies division," he began, nodding to a waiting assistant who distributed glossy presentation folders. "Meridian Advanced Technologies has developed a breakthrough AI system for financial compliance and market intelligence." I listened carefully as Nathan outlined the system's capabilities, noting the carefully constructed narrative that presented the technology as a tool for enhancing regulatory compliance rather than exploiting regulatory gaps. The presentation was masterful, technically accurate, but strategically misleading. We're seeking board approval for expanded investment to bring this technology to market within 6 months, Nathan concluded. The potential revenue impact is substantial, as detailed in your packets. I have several questions, I said when he opened the floor for discussion. First, could you clarify the current deployment status of this technology? The presentation describes it as in development, but I understand versions have already been provided to external partners. Nathan's expression flickered briefly before settling back into confident composure. We've conducted limited beta testing with strategic partners under strict confidentiality agreements, standard practice for technology validation. And these partners have provided funding for this validation process, I continued. Some have made strategic investments in the research, yes. I opened my laptop, connecting it to the boardroom display system. I'd like to share some additional documentation regarding these arrangements for the board's consideration. Nathan's polished facade cracked slightly as I displayed the first document, a partnership agreement with a major hedge fund that explicitly outlined how the technology would be used to identify regulatory arbitrage opportunities. These agreements go well beyond beta testing, I continued, advancing through key documents from Vanessa's files. They establish revenue-sharing arrangements based on trading advantages gained through regulatory gap exploitation. Furthermore, the funding has been channeled through offshore entities specifically designed to avoid regulatory scrutiny. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop as directors leaned forward, expressions shifting from confusion to concern as the evidence mounted. Nathan's attempt to interrupt was overruled by the lead independent director, who requested I continue my presentation. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically outlined the full scope of MAT's activities, the deliberate board circumvention, and the potential regulatory and reputational risks. I concluded with a proposed governance response, immediate suspension of external partnerships, comprehensive audit of all MAT activities, and retention of independent counsel to assess legal exposure. When I finished, the room remained silent. For several long seconds before erupting in overlapping questions and expressions of concern. Nathan attempted to regain control, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had always previously silenced dissent. These materials present a misleading characterization of legitimate business activities, he insisted. The board should consider the source and timing of these allegations before making hasty judgments. The source is Meridian's own internal documentation, I countered calmly. And regardless of timing, these activities represent significant governance failures that require immediate attention. The lead independent director, a veteran venture capitalist named Howard Linden, cleared his throat. I move that we enter executive session to discuss these matters, with only independent directors present. The motion passed unanimously, leaving Nathan, James, and me to exit the boardroom while the independent directors deliberated. In the hallway outside, Nathan turned to me, his expression a complex mixture of anger and calculation. "This is how you choose to exercise your new authority?" he asked quietly. "By ambushing me with stolen documents and mischaracterized activities? This is proper governance," I corrected him. "Something Meridian has lacked for too long. The board deserves full information before making investment decisions, especially when potential regulatory violations are involved." "You have no idea what you've done," he replied, his voice tightening. "The Stevens Group will walk away if they catch wind of regulatory concerns. Years of work, potentially destroyed because you couldn't separate business from personal grievances. This isn't about our marriage, Nathan. It's about your deliberate circumvention of board oversight to pursue questionable activities. I would have raised these concerns regardless of our personal history." Before he could respond, the boardroom door opened. Howard requested that Nathan return for questions, while James and I remained outside. For the next hour, we waited as the independent directors conducted their deliberation, occasionally calling in Nathan or requesting additional documentation. Finally, Howard emerged and asked both James and me to rejoin the meeting. Nathan sat alone at the far end of the table, his usual commanding presence diminished by the gravity in the room. "The board has reached several decisions," Howard announced once we were seated. "First, all external MAT partnerships are suspended pending comprehensive review by independent counsel. Second, the development team will report directly to a special committee of the board until this matter is resolved. Third," he paused, his expression solemn, "we have requested Nathan's temporary step back from CEO duties while the review proceeds." The pronouncement landed with seismic impact. In 12 years, Nathan's authority had never been seriously challenged, let alone temporarily suspended. "This is a severe overreaction based on incomplete information," Nathan objected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "As founder and majority shareholder—" "You are no longer majority shareholder," Howard interrupted gently. "And the board's authority in governance matters is clear under our bylaws. This isn't punitive, Nathan. It's proper risk management given the potential regulatory implications." The meeting concluded with the establishment of an interim leadership structure. James would handle day-to-day operations while the special committee oversaw the MAT investigation. Nathan was instructed to remain available for consultation but removed from decision authority until the review concluded. As we prepared to adjourn, Howard addressed me directly. "The board appreciates your bringing these concerns forward, Eleanor. Proper governance sometimes requires difficult actions, particularly when founders retain operational control during company maturation." Outside the boardroom, I found Maggie, waiting with remarkable prescience. "I thought you might need friendly support after your first board meeting," she explained. From James's expression, I'm guessing it was eventful. "That's an understatement," I replied, the full impact of the morning's events finally registering as adrenaline began to fade. "Nathan has been temporarily removed as CEO pending investigation of potential regulatory violations." Maggie's eyes widened. "When you reclaim your power, you don't mess around." "This wasn't about power," I corrected her. "It was about right governance and ethical business practices." "It can be both," she observed astutely. "Sometimes proper governance requires challenging powerful people, especially those who believe rules are optional for them." As we walked through Meridian's headquarters, I noted the curious glances from employees. News of the board's decision would spread quickly through the company. My identity within these walls had transformed completely, from the founder's wife to a governance authority who had helped suspend that founder from leadership. Near the exit, we encountered Vanessa, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes reflected awareness of what had transpired. "The board meeting concluded early," she observed. "I assume there were unexpected developments." "There were," I acknowledged simply. "The special committee will want to speak with you about MAT documentation. I suggest full transparency." She nodded, understanding the implicit message. Her cooperation would be noted, both professionally and personally. Outside in the bright spring morning, I paused to absorb the culmination of events that had begun at Nathan's birthday party just weeks earlier. What had started as a personal reckoning had evolved into corporate governance reform, potentially reshaping Meridian's future direction. "What happens now?" Maggie asked as we walked toward her car. "Professionally, the special committee conducts its investigation, MAT's technology gets properly governed, and Meridian continues with stronger oversight." I considered the broader implications. Personally, I move forward. With Bennett, Wong, and Mitchell, or Winters and Associates? I smiled, realizing I'd made my decision during the board meeting without consciously acknowledging it. Neither, actually. I'm going to expand my consulting practice, focusing on governance for technology companies transitioning from founder control to mature corporate structures. Maggie studied me with approval. Drawing on your unique perspective and recent experience? Exactly. There's significant need for guidance in that space, helping companies navigate that evolution without crisis or upheaval. As we reached her car, my phone buzzed with a meeting request from the Stevens Group's lead investor. Despite the governance concerns, they were still interested in discussing Meridian's future, perhaps even more interested in understanding how the company would move forward with stronger oversight. 12 years ago, I had set aside my independent professional identity to support Nathan's vision, believing our partnership would be equal though differently expressed. That belief had gradually eroded as his success had shifted our dynamic. From partnership to hierarchy, my contributions increasingly minimized while his were celebrated. Now I stood at the beginning of a new chapter, not defined by reaction to Nathan's betrayal, but by proactive creation of my own path forward. The journey that began with a prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause had evolved into something far more significant than financial settlement or emotional closure. In that perfectly orchestrated birthday party where I had felt like an uninvited guest in my own life, I had reclaimed not just my financial due, but my fundamental agency. The woman who had stood frozen at the entrance of the Bellevue Hotel's grand ballroom, watching her husband's casual betrayal, had transformed into someone stronger, clearer, and fully her own. I was no longer Eleanor Caldwell, supportive wife. I was Eleanor Caldwell, governance authority, strategic advisor, architect of my own future. The journey had cost me a marriage, but returned something far more valuable, myself, reclaimed and renewed, ready to build something entirely my own, ups. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.